E rārangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Whakahonore te kingi Māori. E noho ana I runga I te ahurea tapu o tōna whaia ona matua tīpuna. Tai noa ki te whare ariki o po tātou te whero, kai te mihi aki. Waikato te iwi, Waikato te awa, Waikato tani wharau, he piko, he taniwha, tēnā koutou katoa. Te kaunahira matua o Kirikiri roa, tēnei te whare wānanga o Waikato e mihi nei. E te whakamenenga, katoa kua tai mai nei I runga I te ngā kau tautoko I tēnei pō. Nau mai, haere mai tātou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Neil Quigley. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Waikato. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this second lecture of the Winter Lecture Series. In the Winter Lecture Series, we take the opportunity to invite the community to share in some knowledge and some thoughts about topical issues that are of interest to contemporary society. I think the number of you who've come along this evening is testimony to the success of this lecture series. We thank all of you for being here this evening and for supporting the University of Waikato's Winter Lecture Series. Tonight's discussion, we're looking at water quality. We have a panel of experts covering a wide spectrum of views on this topic. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's host, the University of Waikato's Professor of Environmental Planning, Professor Iain White. Will you please welcome Professor White? Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Neil, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. While the Winter Lecture Series does have its appeals, the drawback is inherent in the title. It's in winter, so thanks for braving the cold and coming out tonight. This Winter Lecture Series is about water. It's about water and the Waikato. And it's about the values we place on it, the pressures we place upon it, the benefits it brings, and also some insights into what the future might hold. The title of the discussion is, do we need to worry about water? And the short answer is, of course we do. Without it, without access to it every day, we wouldn't survive. Without it, we wouldn't have economic growth, we wouldn't have jobs, we wouldn't have employment. And the standards of living we all enjoy wouldn't be as high. We wouldn't have access for recreation or just that sense of being close to water, which makes you just feel a better person, richer for it. It's something that's quite hard to quantify. So the real questions aren't, should we worry about our water? It's to what extent and why, and on what grounds. And that's where the scientific community and other stakeholders come together to try and debate these issues. And this is particularly important for us in the Waikato, because we're, on a global scale, we're incredibly fortunate to live in this place. We're in a water-rich part of the world when lots of other parts of the world aren't. And we hear a lot of stories in the press about what the future might bring, from water metering to water allocation, water pricing, water scarcity or drought, and water quality. So the clues in the question is that it means a lot to a different people. And it's the words that we put in it that really show how much it means to everybody. So we call it a resource, we call it an asset, or something to be allocated. But on the other hand, it goes beyond this economic growth argument. It's something intrinsic, it's a taonga. And it's something that has real cultural resonance in this country. So this is the kind of circle we have to square today. We've got something that's incredibly precious, but we've got a lot of people who want access to it. And I think we also take it for granted in comparison to previous generations. We turn on the tap and it's just there. And that makes us feel a little bit more removed from where it is and what it means. I think maybe in the future, just as in the past, they might be incredibly surprised that we use drinking quality water to flush away our waste. few generations ago, that would just be incredible. And maybe in the future, when it's more scarce, then we might look at it differently again. So we also walk down the river paths, and we gaze upon it, and we just enjoy being near it. But there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to make that water accessible for everybody, to make sure that it's something we can all enjoy. So it's both a public good and a private asset, and that's the problem. It's because it falls from the sky and we think we all own it. It's everybody's, or no one owns it. It's the same kind of question. So it has this feel of a basic human right, but we also need to pay for the infrastructure that moves it to where we want it to go. And we also need to recognize that it does bring huge economic benefits to this region, and this region in particular needs agriculture, needs tourism and other industries. So to help us appreciate the subject in more depth, we've assembled a cast of experts who can provide a rounded and balanced discussion of these topics. And water has such value that it's been called the oil of the 21st century, in the same way that oil caused many of the conflicts of the 20th. So the 21st, water is going to be a key issue. So while I'm hoping the panel will help us debate, disagree, and discuss the issues, I don't think the body count will be as high as during the most of the 20th century. So before we get there, I'd like to introduce the panel. On my left is Professor Jacqueline Rowarth. She's a professor of agribusiness in the Waikato Management School. She's a frequent contributor to public debate on agriculture and agribusiness, and in 2008 was named a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her services to agricultural science. Her research career is largely focused on nutrient management, and she's dedicated to promoting awareness of science and the importance of research to schools, interest groups, and society in general. Next to Catherine is Associate Professor Linda Teaho. She's a lecturer in the University of Te Paringa, the Faculty of Law, where she researches and teaches Māori and indigenous legal issues. Linda serves as lead negotiator for Ngāti Karakia Kahu Korai. How did I do it? That's not bad. Okay. Let's say I've been really worried about some of these words. I've not been in the country that long, so this is a big thing. Treaty claims and provides specialist advice on the Treaty of Waitangi claims and post-settlement governance issues to iwi and hapa organisations, and technical advice on Māori legal issues in relation to land and freshwater to iwi leaders, Crown agencies and government departments. Next to Linda, we have Chris Lewis. Chris is the president of the Waikato branch of Federated Farmers and the National Vice Dairy Chair. He's been with Federated Farmers for more than 9 years, serving previously as Vice Dairy Chair and Dairy Chair. Chris has been a farmer for more than 22 years and milks 1,100 cows on his Puketea Atua estate, a dairy farm, his wife and 2 children. Next is Catherine Delahunty, the Green Party spokeswoman for water quality and rights. She's worked for more than 20 years on wastewater and toxics issues, including campaigning for the cleanup of the Tarawera River, and is currently campaigning to protect waterways from dairy pollution. She's a committed utility activist and believes we have an obligation under the Treaty of Waitangi to protect water and support Manawhai's Kaitakiaki, support the local people as spiritual guardians of water. Catherine's also the Green spokesperson for women's rights, education, human rights, and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And on the end is Dr. Dan Marsh. He's the Waikato Management School's Chair of Economics and an environmental economist with the university's Environmental Research Institute. In recent years, Dan has specialised in the economics of water quality and has worked with the Waikato Regional Council, the Department of Conservation, Fish and Game, and many other stakeholders who advocate for better policies to protect water quality in New Zealand. So that's the panel. The format is that we've got a series of questions where we try and get to grips with some of the main issues which we think about when we think about water. How do we value it? How much of a problem is it? What are water quality issues? What are water quantity issues and metering? And also Māori and cultural issues. And what does the future hold? We'll also try and find time at the end to field questions from the audience. So hopefully we'll have time at the end to hear if there's anything in particular you want to ask and who you might want to address it to. But first, I think we need to get to grips with just the nature of the problem. So the talk today is about, do we need to worry about water? And I think there might be varied views on the panel on to what extent that's the case. So the first question to the panel is, what do we need to worry about with regard to our water? Is it a problem? How much? And why? And perhaps, Jacqueline, just because you're closest and no other reason, you might want to start with that question.
Thank you, Ian. And so I'll go back to what you actually put down on the paper.
Oh, did I change it?
What do we most need to worry about
Okay.
in regard to water quality? And for me, in education, it's absolutely ongoing statements that we're going to help in a canoe, possibly, about water quality, when the comparisons with overseas are fantastic. We are in the top quality for water in most, not all, but most of our nutrient concentrations, E. coli, any of those things. I will quote a Hamilton City Councillor and say you can drink the Waikato from Taupo to Tuakau. I'm British too, sorry, but I practice. So don't drink it at Whakamari where there are a lot of black swans. You might want to avoid just downstream of any cities because of dogs. But apart from that, you can drink it down to the sea. And when I hear some of the press reports, it tends not to be presented like that. And what worries me most as an educationalist is these sorts of statements, when we know that farmers have put, I'll quote Federated Farmers and say, $1 billion into making sure on farm they're capturing nutrients and keeping E. coli, but New Zealand's pretty good in terms of cows and E. coli, keeping it on farm and doing the right effluent stuff. What gets out to the schools is that dirty dairying, agriculture's terrible, and we don't get the bright kids coming through agricultural science, agribusiness, whatever. We have a tremendous group at the University of Waikato. We're particularly recruiting in this area so that we have great people going out. But what I hear in the schools is they don't want to get involved in agriculture, and these bright kids are the ones that will be able to make an even better difference in the future. In education, we reward good behaviour, and the farmers have done a lot, and we can see it in some of the water trends. I like encouraging good behaviour.
I was actually slightly worried we wouldn't fill our time, but I think if anyone's got any plans tonight, we might have to cancel it. So
yeah, just relax with
maybe Linda, do you want to respond initially?
Well, I think what we need to do is not so much worry, because sitting and worrying is doing nothing, and if we do nothing, things are going to get worse. And I'm not so concerned about what's happening in countries who have polluted their rivers for 500 years more than we have. We need to worry about what's happening in our own backyard, and what's happening in our own backyard is that some of our waterways and our lakes and rivers, and particularly small streams and tributaries, are actually dying. Sir Mark Solomon was on TV just the other day to Ngaita, who have just completed a major study of their waterways in terms of freshwater quality, and he says that many of their waterways are on the tipping point of being dead bodies of water. So there is a lot to be concerned about, but what we need to do is take action. And in my view, and it'll come through the various answers to the questions in kōrero tonight, is that iwi have been leaders in terms of identifying and prioritising restoration and protection of the health and well-being of waterways. And so we're going to be getting on to issues, as Iain said, of allocation and Māori rights and interests and those important issues. But when we had the choice of what we would prioritise, we prioritised, in the Waikato particularly, the restoration and protection of the health and well-being of the Waikato River for future generations.
Okay, Chris, you next.
All right. Do we have a problem? Yes, we do. Agriculture is part of the problem. We accept that. We have known about this for a long time, but we're also part of the solution. And we've been working on this for the last 5 years. And you'll notice what Jacqueline was mentioning before. In the Waikato, our farmers have spent well over $350 million on trying to find solutions to this problem. And on my own farm personally, over $300,000. So we've accepted that there's a problem, we're working towards issues, and we're trying to make it better for future generations. So where you have any human activity, whether it's in Hamilton, Cambridge, or on the land, there's going to be an environmental outcome. So it's not just the farming is part of the problem, it's the towns and cities. So we all collectively have got to do our part to get a great outcome. So, so we're involved in the CSG, and so we're going about a collaborative way of finding solutions to this problem. And the answers lie in this community. If we all pitch in like we did in Taupo and Rotorua, you get good outcomes working together. So I encourage it more.
Thanks, Chris. Catherine?
He mihi nui ki te tangata whenua Waikato Tainui, tēnā koutou. Just like to acknowledge the people of this place and the Waikato River, he piko he taniwha, central to this discussion. Is there a problem? Hell yeah. The problem is our belief system, which we are still trying to change, that there is such a place as a way. Because we have treated our rivers like drains. And we have treated them and we have not costed the real externality cost of what we've done to our rivers. So we've got a lot of work to do, and the work has started. I would agree with the previous speakers, the work has started. But 62% of monitored rivers, according to the Lawa research, cannot be swum in. I'm 61 years old, and my mokopuna, unlike me, cannot swim in 62% of monitored rivers in Aotearoa. That is a loss to our nation that we need to take very, very seriously. And so overseas comparisons are not going to help us. What we need to face up to is that statistic. 210 million is being spent trying to clean up the Waikato. Meanwhile, at the top of the catchment, Landcorp want to put 43,000 dairy cows by 2020. If you don't turn off the tap, the Waikato River and all the good work downstream cannot be improved. So these are the issues we have to face. And we can face them, but denial is not going to help it. It's not a river in Egypt. It shouldn't be in Waikato either.
Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually agree with the previous speakers. So it's true that our water quality is very good by international standards. It's also true that it's been getting worse and that there are many areas where we're really not happy with the way it is. I teach environmental economics, and an excellent text that I use to teach from starts by saying what an environmental problem is. It says environmental problems are people problems. They occur when some people are unhappy with other people's use of the environment. Well, that's what we've got in New Zealand. My colleagues at the University of Lincoln have been running an environmental perception survey for many years, and they know that the number one environmental concern of New Zealanders is actually water quality. So we have an environmental problem because the people of New Zealand say we have a problem. They are concerned, they're not happy with current trends. And so certainly major efforts have been made, and we need to continue making those efforts, because if we don't, water quality will continue to get worse.
So how do we understand quality though? Because that's some of the things we've touched on today. Is it something about turbidity or nutrient load, or is it swimmable, drinkable, fishable? How do we communicate what we want and what we value as a society? So how do we get this across about how do people, individuals, what do they want? And what can they expect from the scientific community?
Well, my answer will be to go back to the people. And indeed, that's what the process which has been started on says, that you consult with the people to discover what is important to them in terms of those different values of turbidity, nitrogen, quality of the ecosystem, native fish, and so forth. That's the only place that you can, where it's a people problem. We have to address the problem that the people face.
So is it a people problem, Catherine? You're the one who's closest to politics, who's closest to the electorate?
Well, it certainly is a people problem when the government sets a national policy statement on freshwater management that all we have to aspire to is wadeable rivers. So that's their standard. So whatever the region is doing, the only goal that they have set for fresh water in this country is wadeable. So you can get in there up to your thighs, but don't put your head under. Now, to me, that is more important for people to understand than to have the individualisation and commodification of water. So we can have endless debates about macroinvertebrates and the state of nutrients and how much phosphorus and all the rest of it. But for people in this country, I think what they want to know is, can they get in the river and swim in it? Can they gather tuna? Can they be safe in the river? Can they celebrate it with their visitors and their guests? And can they use it without polluting it? So we actually need to talk with people in a much more direct way about the standard is wrong. Wadable's not good enough. Nowhere near. We need swimmable and we need high gathering standards. And it's been talked about right across the country. We just have to change the people in Parliament to understand that that's what New Zealanders want.
I'm just trying to picture what would be worse than wadable. What's the backward step from wadable? How would water we cannot wade in?
Untouchable.
Challenge what wadable means.
Yeah, what is wadable?
Well, there's some, exactly. I'll show you some rivers that I wouldn't wade in. You go down to the Tarawera below the pulp mill with 150,000 tonnes of pulp mill effluent going down the Tarawera, and if you wade in it and you soak up those fumes, you'll get a headache, because we did it. And I've been trying to clean up that river for 20 years, and the government refused to do it. It has a provision under the RMA that allows them to pollute under emergency circumstances.
But how does this work? Because Dan's telling me that it's the number one concern of people, and something that people wanted, but the government don't necessarily respond.
I could talk for hours about what doesn't respond.
90 seconds.
Well, they wouldn't support my bill to clean up one river because it might, quote unquote, affect business. Now, modern businesses never build their businesses based on pollution. They don't do that. But the historic pollution that's continuing in this country through sewage and point source discharge and through things like the land court conversions are undermining the modern business approach. So government needs to get real. You tell them. I've tried.
I can just Linda. Add to that, Iain, and say that from a Māori perspective, the iwi Leaders Group have just finished 2 rounds of consultation throughout the motu from Kaitaia to Invercargill. And I can confirm that that's exactly the position of what Māori want. They don't want wadable. As Sir Mark said in his interview the other week, when a child is down by the river about to play, they don't stop and think, now can I wade in this river? Can I swim in it? If I get some in my mouth, am I going to get... They just want to jump in and enjoy the river. And it's quite simple, really. But also the taonga species as an indicator of the health and well-being. From our perspective, we're not too fussed on some species, but for tuna and whitebait, they're very important to many Māori. So if they're present in the river, then that's an indicator of health and well-being. And what Māori is saying is that we need to be involved in the decision-making processes so that what's important to us can be reflected in these bottom lines that are coming out.
So is it, if it's not a political problem, or if politics isn't really engaging with this, or Māori views, how do we do it? Do we turn to economics and pricing, or...?
I think it is a political problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a Resource Management Act for many years, and in many ways that was a groundbreaking piece of research. And regional councils are required to make sure that the environment is properly managed, sustainably managed, and that, for example, water quality does not deteriorate. But for many years they did not manage to do that. I do see some encouraging signs in the last few years of more effort to try and take that seriously, and some regional councils, moving towards rules that might eventually achieve that. And we've had the National Policy Statement on Freshwater and so forth. So these are all good signs, but the effort has to continue and probably increase in order to. And as for how much effort we put in, well, I would say that is a political issue. It's about what the people want and how the politicians are persuaded to act, actually. But then economics has always been closely related to politics. So.
But there's also a lot of smoke and mirrors. I mean, for example, in terms of your regional rules around water, your region is allowed to have this, what they call overs and unders policy, which means that so long as the regional area, the standards are over what's required, it can be under somewhere else. So kill that river over there as long as that one looks good. Now, I think that's not only a treaty breach, I also think that's an anathema to anyone that lives with rivers and lives with water quality. So we've got the policy settings wrong at the moment, and much as I respect the vision of collaboration, if the Land and Water Forum are collaborating successfully with each other but didn't implement some of what tangata whenua told them to, then what is the collaboration worth? And if the collaboration means that we're continuing to talk while water quality is static or not improving, then we're actually just negotiating our own human interests without acknowledging what's actually happening to water. So I do think it's a political problem, and I do think that it should be an election issue for Waikato.
So just a quick check. Are people concerned about water? Do they think it should be higher up the political spectrum? Yeah, a few nods.
I don't want to swim in it because it's too jolly cold.
Yeah, if you're a proper Kiwi, I've been told I need to swim in winter to be a proper Kiwi. So if we move in, maybe let's talk about politics a little bit further, because this seems to me that it is an environmental concern, but it's not necessarily, when it comes up against economic concerns, it doesn't necessarily get the credence. So, I mean, business and agribusiness, these are key issues for the...
Oh, it sounded like the forest works that was the problem. But you actually talked about business there, which is an economic problem, because you're talking about a point source. And point sources should be the easiest things to clean up, just cut them off. So what's the business and the economic side of things? Because they are doing a lot with the non-point sources, the diffuse sources.
Well, Landcorp's not. This Wairaki pastoral, diffuse nitrogen is the biggest problem in the catchment. So if you're going to not turn the tap off up on the volcanic plateau and allow all those urine mats to leach into the river, well, there's not much point in all these guys trying to fence and plant their waterways, because these guys are doing great work downstream, and many farming communities have really grappled with that. But if you continue to have agricultural intensification based on the idea that more cows is better, it's a really crude and unsuccessful model. And look at the dairy price. We can't rely on that approach. We need value-added agriculture. We need diversity in agriculture, and we need to make sure that we work within the means of the actual physical environment that we're in. And that's not happening in the upper catchment. The lakes went pink. Karapiro went pink. I went to the meeting. I went on a tour of the hydro lakes with an eel fisherman. Every single hydro lake in your region changed colour because of algae this summer. Something's not working.
Should we remove the dams then?
Well, that's your decision, but I'd like to see the water clean. That's what I'm concerned about.
So how do we value water differently? If this is coming down to perhaps a value of water, some of the debates we've had in the Waikato at the moment about water metering, for example, and as a way, pricing is a proven economic measure to control demand. So is that going to be a way forward, or is that does it rub up against our view of it as a public good? I'm going to start with you now, Dan, as the economist. I'm assuming what you might say, but I might be completely wrong. So should we, if we want to protect something precious, should we have economic controls on it, or demands, or meters?
Well, first of all, you need to know whether you've got a shortage of the thing. Because there are some things which are so plentiful that even when you provide them free, you've still got plenty. And I think probably in the early development of New Zealand, that was probably the case with water. There weren't very many people. There was huge amounts of water, and if people used it for free, and there still wasn't a problem. And if you haven't got scarcity, as in shortage, you don't need to price. But the question comes, if you then look at the amount of water that people want to use when it is free, and there's not enough, or the amount they're using is harming the environment, then what are you going to do about it? It's at that point that I would argue that putting a price on it can often have a useful function. And interestingly, I know that that's also the policy of the Green Party.
Sort of.
But, and I mean, you also asked the question about metering. And I hear what to me is a lot of very sort of muddled thinking. That quite often the statement is, water is a basic need and therefore it should be free. Well, the few litres a day that you need to drink in order to survive, that is a basic need. But the water that you use in the shower to flush the toilet, to water your garden, to clean your car, that's not a basic need at all. And that basic need argument doesn't wash. Secondly,
as it were.
food and housing and health, well, they're basic needs too, but actually we don't provide them free. I could give you countless examples actually where people saying that something should be provided free results in very poor quality provision, which often, usually harms the poor more than the rich. So I'll just, one more point about the sort of water metering thing. Assuming you have got a shortage of water and you want people to use it carefully and take account of its value, I don't really understand why people have a problem with water meters. We don't usually have a problem with electricity meters. I don't find many people saying electricity is a basic need and we should be provided it free and we shouldn't have electricity meters. We should just be pay a standard amount and use as much as we want all year. I've never heard that argument. There's really not much difference between water and electricity. A meter is a fair way of sharing the stuff out.
So, Catherine, do you want to tell us what the Green Party position is this before Dan lets everyone know?
Dissimilar, but one of the key things you didn't mention was we're opposed to privatisation of water. We think water should be a public good and managed by public agencies, and so that's a big thing around. In terms of the assets, we recognise the importance of water being managed for the good of all, and that might mean charging in some places. But I'm not sure that we've got a water shortage now. I think we've abused water so much that it's become short. But those of us who did in the country with a tank actually know how to manage water. In fact, we can teach people how to manage water, conservation of water, the valuing of how precious it is. And that's why, you know, the cultural dimensions of water are really, really important, the spiritual dimensions of water, because they help us value and recognise our essential relationships. So I'd be saying sometimes you might consider metering, but the most important thing is that I was in Auckland when they said we were running out of water, and then for about a month or so they had these big advertising campaigns before we were lucky enough to get the Waikato River into the water supply of Auckland, which some of us didn't want at the time because there was a lot of toxic discharges going to the river at the time. So we didn't want it, but people saved water amazingly. People are capable of incredible discipline around water, but they have to value it as a precious resource. That's what country people do. You know, we're used to it. But for urban people, they're just used to having unlimited supply, and so they don't see it as a precious resource. And there's one thing coming down the track, one big train that's called climate change. And so we are going to be living with climate extremes that include major droughts. Even in the Waikato, we've experienced that already. So we are all going to have to learn to be conservationists around water. And if we're going to put a price on water, I'm okay with commercial charging of water. I think there should be a commercial charge on water. But for citizens, I think if we've got a meter, and I take your argument, I think we also have to recognise too that alongside climate change and water issues, we have increasing inequality. And so we have to recognise some people are struggling to feed their families. So struggling to pay for water would just be another burden. We have to think about that when we make any political decision.
I mean, just for a wider context, we use in New Zealand about 350 litres of water per person per day. In the UK, it's about 150, so less than a half. So you think about the scope, and they're trying to get down to 130 litres a day, so almost a third. So then you're thinking about there's a lot we could do just on behavioural change or technological change without actually appearing to be too much of a sacrifice.
Is that just domestic?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Linda, you wanted to come in?
I did. I wanted to say that I agree that what we need to do is change our mindset around water. We don't value water. We don't treat it as a taonga. We collectively, some do, but generally we don't. And in order to change that mindset, sometimes we have to get into the habit of doing things differently. So pricing could be a way of changing people's behaviour. People are already paying for water, and not just on the East Coast where they have drier summers than we do. We've heard here in the South Waikato and Tuakau, in that particular area where marae have had to buy in water tankers because their water is now either dried up because of climate change and ongoing drought after drought, season after season, but also the pollution coming from market gardeners in Pukekohe. So marae are now actually having to pay for water, and they do really think quite carefully about how they wash what they're going to use that valuable water for. In terms of commercial payments, I agree I'm not too sure whether the iwi Leaders Group have got a formal position on that, but I do know that we at Waikato University hosted a symposium in November last year in conjunction with Waikato Tainui up at Hopu Hopu, and one of the propositions put by Sir Eddie Jury at that symposium was that polluters ought to pay. So people who have gotten away with using water and selling it overseas through other products haven't actually paid for the privilege of doing that. And the environmental impacts of their use of that water have left us with a legacy of 50 years or more of cleanup. And so I do think that we need to think seriously about that. But what we have to do in terms of thinking serious about that, I don't want to be too self-promoting of the university, but, interdisciplinary
I'm not going to stop you.
research from all of the different faculties and the different expertise that we have based at the university, is the perfect kind of place where this thinking and research could come from to provide some positive pathways forward.
Well said.
Okay, Chris, now let's move down to Chris.
I'm a dairy farmer. We pay the regional council a privilege for getting a resource consent to get water out of the ground. It is metered. So there's no such thing as free water on a dairy farm. Make it very clear. We pay a grand sum to the regional council. We've got to pay for it to be pumped out of the ground. We've got to pay for it to be pumped to the cow shed, then pumped around the farm. We pay a lot of times. And then we have water loss, we pay again because it's not very efficient. So that's why we have water meters. So, in fact, I hear this time and time again in farming. All we want is one rule for all. If farmers have got to treat water with respect, so do people in town. We all have a consent which allows us to take so much water out for our business, and that's it. Otherwise, the regional council will find out about it. So it's only fair in town that you can only measure something by using water meters. You cannot, how do you know you're losing it if you're not measuring it? How can you put a price on it if you're not measuring it? So in the farming world, we've accepted that we have water meters, it's getting measured, and we use our fair allocation wisely, and we can get no more. So I encourage the people in the cities here, in the towns, to treat it with respect that we have to in the country. And it just means it's a cost. And I know a lot of people like ourselves, dairy farmers right now, we've got no money. People in town are struggling too. And I don't want to be seen to be putting more burden on the ratepayers than they are. But end of the day, we all got to pay our fair share for our resource.
Jacqueline, did you want to add to?
I'm British.
Yeah,
When
okay.
I go back and see my friends, I don't think they wash enough. So I'm a bit concerned about going down to 130 litres a day, but
It's ironic. That's what they say about the French. It's ironic.
So there's a bit of a problem. Best way to save water on farm: don't let your wife do the wash down. We're so particular. Let the blokes do it and the milk's still okay. But effectively, in terms of water, we're extremely lucky in New Zealand. Yes, we have vast amounts that's flowing around. Most of it just goes out to sea. And the first come, first served water allocation system that we have is completely loopy. Again, we've got people looking at that at the University of Waikato, but hearing about 3 billion litres being consented in Hawke's Bay to be pumped out of the aquifers and sold in bottles to China just
Well, that's probably a good. We'll turn to water allocation now.
That's value add.
Yeah. We read stories in
bottles.
the Waikato Times that Auckland and Watercare are trying to get another 200,000 litres of water a day from the Waikato, something which is actually a strategic advantage to us. And maybe it's a resource for us to use within this region to grow and develop. So how do we think about water allocation? You've done a lot of work on this, Linda. Do you want to start there?
Absolutely. So the iwi position on allocation is that there must be an allocation for iwi in terms of an equitable outcome from the current discussions with the Crown. So the Supreme Court, the Waitangi Tribunal have all agreed that Māori have rights and interests that haven't been adequately recognised and need to be as a matter of urgency, as a matter of priority. And so I mean, senior ministers are meeting with iwi leaders regularly and talking about allocation. And what they've done just most recently is they've funded 4 key work streams. And one of those key work streams is, what does an allocation for iwi look like? What will it cost? What are the costs and benefits for it? And some of the research that's come out has shown that if Māori rights and interests are adequately recognised, it's actually not just good for Māori but good for New Zealand, because it provides certainty around water rights for all. And it also provides some equity, because we've been excluded from accessing water for a number of, for decades, really, for 150 years. And so what that's meant is that some of our lands that we're now getting back through treaty settlements, we don't have access to water because of the first in, first served allocation method. So that doesn't do much for our economy. It's vulnerable, being, you know, so dependent on a couple of industries. It doesn't leave room for diversity or new entrants. And it's also inequitable, because it's been excluded Māori from bringing our lands into the economy. It's also been inequitable in terms of access to our cultural harvesting areas, so we haven't been able to live our tikanga and keep our language pertaining to those tikanga alive. So that's part of the bigger picture. So allocation for us is not just economic, but it's also cultural, and it's a really pressing issue that needs to be addressed, because I don't think we're going to be able to walk the pathway forward until these issues are addressed.
So is there a view from the dairy sector about allocation? Because these are quite critical issues for you, because you need the water and you've got the rights to use it. And is this the kind of conversation you're worried about or happy to engage in, or what does allocation mean to the sector?
We've got enough water on the Waikato. Every day I see it go past out to the sea, so it's just about fair allocation of it. And you know, it's plenty there just to be allocated fairly. I see that with the iwi, I see it is a good opportunity to get endurable and sustainable solutions, not only environmentally but also socially, economically. So it's about fair allocation. And so yeah, as long as the end of the day, we all want jobs, we all want a strong economy, we all nice houses, but we need to balance it with the environment. And that's the issue we have, is how do we have a good environment with a good economy? Because if we don't have either, none of us will be here.
And I'd go the other way and say, without a good environment, you have no real economy. That's a myth that usually crumbles in a disastrous way. So, you know, we can have fair water allocation. I agree with what the panellists have said, particularly Linda Tautoko, the Article 2 proprietorial rights that have been clearly established in law for tangata whenua and have always been there. So to me that helps to clarify the debate. But one of the problems we've got is the Prime Minister said that no one owns water. Meanwhile, a random first come, first served, a random sale of water bottles to China, irrigation's being subsidised by the Crown without any acknowledgement of other users. And I think one of the problems of, I mean, both of you, I think, used the expression of they watched the water running down out into the sea. Like, that's a bad thing? Actually, from an ecological point of view, that's what we need it to do. And that's how it sustains itself. And what we need is to protect the flows of the rivers, not just see them as, oh my God, all this, like John Keyes said it, oh, it's all just rushing out to sea, like that was some kind of problem. I mean, really, that's quite bizarre, and it's quite odd. And if we're going to allocate, we have to recognise the allocation of the other beings, the rights of other beings to have water, as well as farmers, as well as industrial, as well as humans. All of those things need to be thought about. So we need a catchment-based approach to water allocation that looks at everybody who's involved. So everybody who has a relationship, I'm more interested in relationships than I am with the issue of ownership in a sense. I think tangata whenua have been forced to talk ownership because of the failure to acknowledge their relationship. So I think that's the critical issue. So we really need to say, who are all the people involved in this? And I'm not talking about Nick Smith's land and water fire reform, corroboration model, blah, blah. I'm talking about us and our own communities actually engaging and saying, everyone has an interest, not just the people who are making money out of this, and they certainly have to be included, but they are not the only people who value water. So we actually have to have a different system of allocation, but we can't have the Prime Minister pretending that no one owns water, meanwhile allowing the free market to pollute it. So, you know, that's the challenge.
I'm sure that everyone agrees that we should have a fair allocation. But if we had long enough, we'd probably discover that there's at least 50 different views as to what that fair allocation might be, because different people have different views on what fair means. So in reality, you're going to have some sort of collaborative process to decide on some of those priorities based on fairness principles. But I suggest that actually pricing can also be useful and should be part of the mix, because that can lead to a kind of fairness. I mean, to give an example, if water is free, and you've got a resource consent to do flood irrigation, you've really got no particular incentive to do better. But if you actually have to pay for your water, perhaps you'll put in precision irrigation, which will be a much more efficient use of the water, and incidentally would also be better for the environment. So I think we need a mix of using the market and also looking at some sort of socially determined priorities.
Well, that's probably a good time now to turn our attention to the final question of the evening, which is just about the future. It's about what the future pressures might be, what we had a story in the Waikato Times today that we're going to get an extra 40% population in the Waikato in the next 50 years. You've got Auckland growing at an enormous rate when the water resources are static. There's no major investment. And investment costing an awful amount of money. So if we can go around the panel and think about what are the major pressures and what do they think the next 10, 20 years will look like? Will we solve these problems? So Jacqueline, should we start with you? What do you think the future holds, and is it all going to be rosy?
In the 1 or 2 decades
that
we're looking ahead.
Well, you can go farther if you prefer.
I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't.
Okay.
So as a science type person, I think we will have sorted out the point sources, the city councils, the regional towns. We will have sorted out the industry that is allowed at the moment to put effluent or waste into the rivers. And that should be actually perfectly simple to do. It's an economic or a business decision, and it will help the rivers. I think we will also see some of the nutrients that are working their way through the system will get into the water, but they will rush out to sea. And my point about rushing out to sea is without any use at all. And you might say that looking at it is a use, or swimming on it, or boating on it is a use, but nevertheless, there are people who need water and might look at ours and think they'll come and take it, and I'm talking about from overseas. But overall, the farmers, I believe, are doing a tremendous job in capturing their nutrients and using them on the land. And they are making sure that they're not escaping all the new technologies, and I agree with you about the Wairaki conversions, but some of the new technologies are going in to ensure that we don't exacerbate any problem that we have. And overall, we can drink the Waikato, except in the Whakamaru Dam, down to the sea.
Okay, Linda?
Well, 10 years just isn't long enough to look forward. When we were working through the Waikato River settlement, we used a saying of King Tawhiao when he was looking into the looking back at the river, and we used that as our visionary statement for the future, that we would see a river teeming with life, and a river that our future generations could enjoy. But the reality is that although there's these new technologies going in now, a lot of the damage has already been done. And so we're not actually going to see any of the benefits of the restoration work that we're doing now for another 50 years. So what that means to me is that we actually have to ramp up the restoration work. We have to do more rather than just say, oh, it's going to get better because we've got new technologies. That's not good enough. We have to do more, and we have to do more now. If we really do want to have our mokopuna being able to use and enjoy the rivers, because if not, then a whole culture dies and a whole vocabulary dies, and that's not acceptable as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Chris.
Look, in the Waikato, we've got the CSG process. Farmers are involved in that. We support the collaborative approach to finding solutions to our river. And solutions that are going to be durable for the next 10 to 50 years. I'm not looking at opinions, I'm looking for a science-based approach to finding solutions. And you looked at what happened in Lake Rotorua when the community, the farmers, the forestry, the iwi all got together to look at the issues. They set a 50-year time frame. They achieved it in 10 years, the outcomes for the environment. So if we all work together, we'll get great outcomes, and I encourage that.
Yeah, I agree with the others about the time frame. It's a bit too short. things are going to change quite fast, and I believe that humans can change fast if they have to. And I think we're going to have to value water more, and we will, with climate change. But, you know, let's not get too romantic about what's happening, because Lake Taupo, even our wonderful Minister of the Environment, Mr. Nick Smith, with whom I have interesting dialogue, said that the reason why Taupo has improved is because they cut the numbers of animals on the land. So it's the technology of respect and the technology of a different type of economy is the vision that we hold as the Greens. We do not want the growth model as it's currently defined, because it's relying on more and more and more and more animals, more and more need to control things at the wrong end. What we actually want is to actually work on an economy where we actually add value to everything that we do. And so less can be more. And our relationships with valuing soils, valuing water, and valuing climate has to change drastically if we're actually going to see real progress. Otherwise, in 10 or 20 years' time, if you keep on voting the government in, we're just going to have more and more, you know. Well, I was at the TPPA rally today. We're going to have more and more foreign control of our resources. I agree. And actually, that is the last thing that's going to deliver sustainability, let alone swimmable rivers. So let's get over wading around an effluent and get real about valuing the precious resource, which is our.
Okay. Dan?
Well, I'm a bit of an optimist.
Me too.
Yeah.
But not so much.
Provided that, you know, the people really make their views felt and the politicians take action and we come up, implement the right policies. It's going to take time, you know. Because there's a big we're on a downward trend now, and we'll need a major effort even to bottom out and then turn it around. But as we do that, what I think is really important is that we carefully select, firstly, the targets to aim for, and when we sort of select those targets, we need to take full account of all the costs and all the benefits. When I'm saying all the costs and benefits, people tend to think, oh, I'm an economist, I'm only interested in the market ones. But I'm an environmental economist, and we actually care about all of the costs, all of the benefits, including the externalities. That's what I mean. But what's really important, and I think is sometimes not appreciated, is the huge differences that there can be between the different approaches we can take. For example, I did some work with a colleague, Randall, looking at different policies which we could follow to reduce nitrogen leaching from farming. We were looking at reducing cow numbers, banning nitrogen fertilizer, land retirement, cap and trade scheme, and so forth. The difference between the cheapest one, which was like $50, which was a cap and trade scheme, and land retirement, that was $400, 8 times. It is very, very common to find that different policies we're looking at for the same outcome can have a vastly different level of cost effectiveness. There are many, you know, which might cost 10 times as much for the same benefit. So we really have to have a good process to make sure we get the best policies.
Okay, thanks. And we've probably got time for one question from the audience, if it's quick, and if our panel are quick too. Gentleman over there, I saw your hand up earlier, but it was mid-debate, so I couldn't come to you.
I hear a lot of issues about the farmers, but the arsenic level in our water is very high from geothermal, about 4 times higher than safe standards, carcinogenic. And the E. coli levels are much higher as soon as you hit Hamilton than above Hamilton. There's a lot of sewage that we're putting in the water.
Yep.
So I know those 2 issues.
We agree.
Well, if you want to comment about sewage, I could talk about it for hours.
I think, yeah, before we clear the room, well, just...
Men on the moon, into water, like, we are so primitive. You know, and our attitude towards waterways and towards human waste is unbelievable. So I completely agree with you. And what's more, my partner's a scientist. He's doing some research on what's in human waste. And we've got a class of chemicals now, a new breed of complex chemicals emerging in our human waste, which means he's working with tangata whenua in Tairāwhiti. They're trying to get it out of the... We've worked for 20 years to get it out of the sea and put it on land and get it out of the Waikato River, all of those things. But... you've got to acknowledge that human waste is not what it was when tangata whenua just went into the forest and had their place for human waste. It's now a toxic substance, not only for medicines, hormones,
Yeah.
Look, don't get me started on household cleaners. Like, it's as bad as arsenic. Some of the stuff we're using to clean the toilet is as bad as heavy metals. So, yeah, talk to me later.
Okay, that's probably a good point. If anyone wants to talk to Catherine later, then form an orderly queue. But I'd like to invite Professor Quigley back to the stage now to give some closing remarks.
Bloody, I love talking. It's very interesting.
Thank you, Iain, and can I thank all of the panellists for a very engaging and interesting discussion. Jacqueline, Linda, Chris, Catherine, and Dan, thank you all very much for being here this evening and for sharing your thoughts with us. For those of you who might wish to talk to any of the panellists further, afterwards there's an arrangement at Embargo Restaurant in Garden Place where there's a $19 main meal available, and at least some of the panellists will be there for some time after the lecture, I believe. So if you'd like to go just for a drink and a chat or to eat, then please join us at that after the lecture ends. So this is one of a series of lectures. Next week's lecture will also take place here at the Civic Reception Lounge with Raybon Khan hosting a panel to discuss New Zealand as a multicultural society. And then the last lecture takes place at the Gallagher Academy of Performing Arts at the university with comedian Jan Marie with a group of proud Hamiltonians discussing what we love about living in Hamilton. If you'd like more details, pick up one of the brochures as you leave this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for coming this evening. I hope you found it enjoyable and entertaining. Thank you.